boxes and questions asking you what your application will be making use of, what features, whether you'll be making use of commerce, multimedia, networking, and you just simply tick the boxes and specify all the functionality that you intend to use. You will then be asked some questions as to what devices you want your application to run on. So you go ahead and you select all the devices that you intend to hit, to have your application run on. Once you've done all of that, you will save your configuration, and the output of that will be a manifest file. And then you're given an option to download that manifest file. Now, the manifest file downloaded from the development site has the syntax manifest _ date, the date string, .xml. You're required to rename that file to remove the underscore of the date such that it reads manifest.xml. And then you copy that to the root you write over the default manifest file with the file you've obtained from the development site. So that's the correct process of defining your application. Now, if throughout the development of your application you make use of further resources, further functionality, you're actually encouraged to go back to the developer site, identify your application, and once you select your application, then you can go ahead and perform editing. So you can say, I want to make use of further application, further functionality required. So I can actually select this and I can perform editing. So I can set up further components, I can select different devices. So this was a sample application that I created. It was developed at 1.2 version of the SDK. This is the correct application ID assigned by the developer site. I've specified that this application is to work on wave 1 and wave 2. And I've specified that the functionality that I'll be making use of will be Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, GPS. So these are what I'm going to do. Now let's say I perform some modification to add further privileged groups. Once I've completed that, I then come to here, download an updated manifest file. So whenever you make new changes, you go back to the developer site, you upgrade your application's definition, create a new manifest file that is downloaded into the root of your project folder. Now, sometimes you just want to hack around, as software engineers like to do, and you can actually edit this to add privileges without doing it through the developer site. Now, if you wanted to do that, you can simply right-click on the manifest file and then say Open with Text Editor. And what it does, it shows the HTML of what a manifest file looks like. If I wanted to add another privilege, I would simply replicate what I have here and add another HTML privilege tag and add the new privilege level into it. If I wanted to specify a different API version, I could do that here. So this is only if you really want to, quickly try something out, but really you should go back to the development site and correctly define your application, update the manifest file, download it, and then overwrite the one you currently have. Okay. So if we go back to our UI controls and we look in the source folder, there will always be a file, there will always be two files which exist when your application project is created. One will be an entry file, so it will always take the name which you've given your application and it will append onto it entry.cpp. This is a file which you do not have to modify, but all our Bada applications have an entry file. And this functionality contained within this file is called upon when the user selects the application icon in the app menu. So this basically launches your application. So I'll open it up for you, but you don't have to perform any activity in here. What this is simply doing is creating an instance of your application. So this is calling create instance on the UI controls class to create an instance of this application. So that's the entry file, something to look out for. You'll also have another file, which is given the name of your application. So in this case, this is called UIcontrols.cpp. So this is your application's main file. This application comes pre-populated with those methods which I mentioned that drive the application lifecycle. So if you created this application from scratch, you'll see that it creates the on-app initializing, the on-app terminating, the on-foreground, and the on-background. Now, in addition to this, there are some other methods which are pre-populated for you. Again, for your usability, you're under no obligation to make use of them. They're there in case you wish to use them. You can be informed of when the battery level changes. The application framework will inform you when the screen is on and the screen is off. And another important one, when there's low memory. So when you create an application, you'll get two files, an entry file and your main application file. And it will have all these methods already there. And as you can see here, to do, it's for you to complete these methods with whatever functionality is required to make your application work. Okay, on-app initializing. As I stated earlier, this is the method which should be called by the application framework when your application is about to start. You get a handle to your application's registry. With this, you can read and write any settings that your application may want to store and retrieve every time it's started. Again, complete flexibility here. You can store integers, strings, booleans, in any format that you wish to, into which you wish to store. So, what is on-app initializing doing in the UI controls sample application? What it's doing is it's creating a new form manager. Now, if you recall, when I described the architecture of an application, I stated that an application has an empty window called a frame, and into that frame we superimpose multiple different forms or views. Onto each of those forms we put controls. The controls are the mechanisms by which users can interact with your application, whether it be a list, button, a soft key, a footer item, all these are controls and users interact with them. Now, an application will typically be made up of multiple forms, and you need some way of managing all those forms. Now, Samsung doesn't provide within the platform a mechanism for doing that, but we give you examples in the sample application of how you can manage that. And one such way of managing multiple forms is to employ or make use of a form manager. So a form manager is essentially almost a service, but it's not quite a service. It's just simply something running, and all it's doing is waiting to receive requests to display a form. So if we follow the example, what we're doing here, we're creating the form manager instance, and then using two-phase construction, but not using the word construct, we're calling initialize on the form manager. So what we've done here, we've created a form manager, and we've just initialized it. Now, what we're going to do in this line here, we're going to associate or add control of that form manager, which is a form, to our application's frame. Now, the form manager is a unique type of form in that we add it to our application's frame, but it's not actually a visible form. It's just a form which is associated with our application's frame, but it's not visible. All its job is to do is to receive requests to display visible forms. So on our form manager instance, we can call this set starter form, and what this will do is basically send an indication to the form manager to say, put up the first form to be displayed. Now, before we go into more code, what I'm going to do, I think we should run the UI controls example and see how it works, and then once we have an understanding and appreciation of how it works, we can then delve into the code and look at it